Well, I've now remixed all the colours I used in the background and the middle distance, and I'm going to employ these in the foreground, starting where I took the masking fluid off there in the middle distance, with the Naples yellow mixture with a hint of permanent rose in it. And I'm sweeping that right across with the number 14 brush. Don't leave any white paper, try and go right up to the last lot of paint before you took the masking fluid off. As I work that down, I'm going to introduce some nice bright green. This is the Orient and Cobalt Blue. Again, it's the same colour that I used on the fields behind the buildings. Maybe it's a good idea if you make it slightly stronger this time, just slightly richer. And as I come down here, I'm introducing that mixture of raw sienna and burnt umber to put a nice rich brown in the foreground. You can see the importance of having all these colours mixed and ready, because you want one colour to merge into the last one. That won't happen if you have to keep stopping to mix some more. You'll just get a row of stripes. So to make that happen, it's well worth taking the time to mix them first. I want a little bit more warmth in the foreground, a bit of red. So I'm adding some burnt sienna to that burnt umber mixture and brushing a touch of that across the very front of the picture. Okay, now I'm going to take some dark green made of viridian, ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. In fact, it's the same dark green that I used on those cypress trees behind the buildings. And I'm going to put a bit of this bush just to the right of that bit of the building that sticks out. Let it soften into the background, and then with a damp clean brush softening it into the wall there. And then I'm going to add a little bit of lemon yellow. This is neat lemon yellow, but because lemon yellow is opaque, you can lay it onto a dark colour and it just goes a bright green then. Okay, I'm going to, with a number 6 brush, just dampen the wall of this building on the left here with clean water, and then I'm going to put some bushes into there as well, just letting them soften into that clean water that I just put in there. Bringing that right down to meet the still damp foreground, so it just softens in and we don't get hard, obvious edges. And again, just like on that last bush, I've got a bit of neat lemon yellow and I'm dropping that in to give us a hint of brighter green. Okay, now one or two things. I can just carry on with these greens using the dark green again. I think we'll use this to pinpoint the shape of the building. Look how that dark green going in there really picks out the edge of that wall and the light on the roof. It just really brings that forward for us. But it's a bit of a hard edge at the top, so I'm just going to use the number 2 brush on its side again, where I hold it with my thumb at one side of the handle and 4 fingers at the other, so that I can get that broken edge, still using this rich dark green mixture. We'll put another bush, I think, in this side. These are all helping to create a little bit of light in the foreground by slightly darkening the middle distance there. Okay, now so that we can have a nice bit of light on the front of these hay bales, I'm going to put a little bit of dark behind, using the side of the brush again, but indicating a bit of dark green behind them like that. That will help me to be able to pick out the light side of these, because it gives me a bit of dark green behind them. A bit more of that. Again, there's a little tree here. Again, I'm going to use that dry brush technique to put that in. And again, the tip of the number 2 brush and some lemon yellow. Neat lemon yellow to give us a bit of light colour. Remember to be consistent with the angle of the light as well. I mean, the light's coming from the left, so it's always the left-hand side of the tree or bush that has the brighter colour. A little touch of it into here as well. Really useful colour, lemon yellow. You can really take advantage of the fact that it's opaque by getting it with some dark green behind it. Okay, so we'll leave that stage to dry. So now that the background's dry, I've got some more of that dark brown mixture, and I'm just putting in a few details like tree trunks and a few branches. One here as well. And now I'm going to put some more details in with shadow. So I'm swapping to the number 6 brush, and I'm just going to mix some more of that shadow colour, the cobalt blue and permanent rose. Again, nice and transparent, and worth reminding yourself all the time of the direction of the light so that you remain consistent. So it's coming from the left. That's going to cast some shadow into the foreground. So is that tree there. Again, shadow from the building. Always paint shadows in the direction they cast. That way, like for instance here, the colour is more solid right from where it's being cast, but it gets thinner as you move further away. It looks more effective if you can do that. Let's put the little trunk in for that tree there. And again, a bit of shadow from that as well. We could have some shadow here coming in from the left. We don't need to see what's casting that shadow because it's not even in the picture, but it still looks more convincing if you've got some shadow describing the shape of the land. These bushes here, again, they're going to cast a bit of shadow. That one there, but that shadow would be lost behind that building. These trees here. And it also picks up the texture of the paper as well when you get a bit of shadow in like that. Okay, so we'll just leave that to dry. Well, now that I've taken the masking fluid off the hay bales, you can see these definite cylindrical shapes. And I've mixed some colour to represent these. That's raw sienna with just a hint of permanent rose. Not much permanent rose, just use it to warm it, but make sure you have got more of a yellow than an orange. And I'm going to paint these over the hay bales. I'm going to try on the top edge to leave the tiniest little bit of white paper to really try and make it look as though the sunlight coming from the left-hand side is catching the shape of the hay bales. Okay, painting it right down to meet the ground. The same procedure on all of them, but again, look for the area that's going to be facing the light and try and leave the tiniest little hair's breadth of white paper, clean white paper, but then again, make sure you do bring the colour right down to the ground. Again here, this is the edge now that would be catching the light. And it's very subtle, it's less than a millimetre, it's a tiny little gap of dry white paper. And I'm going to make the colour slightly redder now by adding a bit more permanent rose to it and float that in at the bottom. If you can make your colour a little bit warmer, a little bit redder towards the ground, it helps to give the impression of a bit of reflected light. And then of course the hay bales need some shadow, so we'll leave them to dry before we add that. So now that that hay colour has dried, I'm mixing some colour for the shadow. Again, to be consistent with my shadow colour, I'm going back to the cobalt blue and permanent rose, a little bit stronger this time because it's important that there's a real definition between the light side and the dark side of these. Then I'm adding to the mixture a little bit of burnt sienna to slightly grey it, and bearing in mind the direction of the light, it's this front edge of this bale that is in shadow. Again, I'm trying to get that bit of texture into them by painting in rounded strokes like that. And I've added a little bit of the hay colour into it as well, every so often as I paint the shadow. I'm going to make the shadow colour strongest, nearest to where it catches the light there to really bring out the illuminated side. Added a little bit of dark brown to the bottom of it because the shadow is at its strongest where it meets the field there. And then to finish that off, I've got more shadow colour and I'm bringing a bit of shadow from that hay bale into the grass. Okay, now I'm going to repeat that procedure on the next one, but this time it's the side of the bale that is in shadow. So tucking it right under there, very much using the point of the brush at that point there where it meets the ground. That bit of dark in at the bottom, but you can see there that that line is very neat and tidy, far too much, so I'm going to get the number 2 brush, make sure it's clean, and just loosen that line up. In fact, with a bit more of the hay colour, I'm going to put a bit of texture into that, still with the number 2 brush, but still trying to leave that little bit of white paper, picking out where the light catches the bale with the dark green behind it. And finally on this one, just like the last one, we have to get that direction of the light emphasized by the shadow. Okay, and the last one, same procedure. Again, we've gone back to the front now and the side in shadow. I'm just going to take another wash of burnt umber with a little touch of cobalt blue in it to darken the foreground. Often if you can get the foreground a bit darker than the middle distance, it really brings that forward to where the viewers stood. So let's bring that across here to create a bit of texture. I'm running the brush across quickly, just catching the raised surface of the paper and softening that in with clean water. And we'll leave that to dry. Well, now that I'm looking at the finished painting, I just think that a bit of shadow across the distant fields would really help to bring it to life and create a bit of contrast, a bit of light against dark. So I've got some more of the shadow mixture, the cobalt blue and permanent rose. For this, I don't want it too strong. It's quite a subtle hint of shadow, really. I've got the large number 14 brush, and I'm just going to do a few quick sweeps across the distance. I've got to work quickly because if you linger with your brush strokes, you're likely to disturb the dark colour on the cypress trees and smudge them. And I think maybe a touch across there as well, and perhaps into this area here. And that should do. We'll leave that to dry. So there we have the finished painting. Let's just recap what we've done. I started off by masking certain areas where I knew that later on as the painting developed, I'd be glad I'd still got white paper. I then painted the sky in, keeping the colours nice and light and putting in those distant trees while the sky was still damp, so we got that soft diffused shape. I then indicated the shape of some distant cypresses which echoed the ones in the middle distance and took your eye across those fields. I made a few marks with some burnt umber and the rake brush to suggest the ploughing shape across the fields, and I made sure that the direction of my brush strokes reminded the viewer of the shape and undulations of the land. Then we came to the buildings, and you could see how important shadow was to make them look three-dimensional and solid. Then we had that nice bright area across the foreground, right at the base of the buildings, rapidly darkening that towards the front of the picture to give that feeling of distance. And the cylindrical shapes that were provided by the hay bales were an important addition, a little bit of extra interest in the scene. Let's just consider the range of tones I've used, from the nice soft light colours in the sky and across the distant fields to the rich darks in the shadows on the buildings and the cypress trees. Also, we need to consider how you get a harmony in the picture by using a limited palette of colours. Look at how that purple colour in the sky was echoed in the shadows, and how the colours and tones in the distant fields were echoed in the foreground. So we can see how important it is to get that consistency of colour throughout the scene. So happy painting, and I'll see you next time.
Now available to buy. Try these techniques at home whenever you wish. The extended DVD of today's workshop and the book that accompanies this series are now available from the Painting and Drawing channel. For further information and to order your copy, go to www.paintingdrawingchannel.com.